Good evening, Jay Baba.
Hi, everyone.
Tonight, we only have an hour and 15 minutes, so to present women mandali in that amount of time is not enough. So the three that we'd like to talk about are the three that we knew here, Elizabeth, Kitty, and Margaret, and more on how they were here when a lot of us came in the late 60s, in the 70s and 80s. Elizabeth died in 1980, so, and then Margaret in 1990 and Kitty in 91, so it was during the 80s that Margaret and Kitty were here, and then Elizabeth in the 70s. We're also trying to do a little introduction because there are some new people, although I see older faces. And how delightful it is to see you here. I meant to put it like that.
Old timers.
Old timers like us, like us. But we put this in the newsletter, so it goes out to like a lot of people. 5,000 plus people, so a lot of people are new. One of the amazing things about Elizabeth and Kitty that I felt coming here I came here in 71, was that there were a lot of young people coming at that time during the 70s and 80s, but particularly in the 70s and late 60s, early 70s, there were hundreds, maybe thousands who came here. And Kitty was a late Victorian woman. She was born in 1891. And Elizabeth was born in 1896 in Chicago and then moved to New York. So they were, you would think, and they were in their late 70s, early 80s when a lot of us came. And that's older than a lot of us in this room, if you think. And you would think, oh, how could they deal with all these people who are, long hair and weird ideas about spirituality, and half of them think they're in the plains and all that. So, that's really quite true. So how did they deal with it? But, at the time, I don't think any of us thought about it because it was so natural. They were so present and so flexible. So many people came, and Elizabeth added cabins. She changed the programming. She expanded this building. She built other buildings to accommodate people who came. In other words, it was a seamless kind of thing. But now thinking back, it was because, of course, of their training with Baba, all those years having to be flexible. And when something happens, take it as Baba's will, and something as big as that and as kind of miraculous as that a lot of us wandered in here and our lives were completely changed. And the miracle still happens. People come to the center and their lives are completely changed in ways that are inexplicable, but are life-saving and just miraculous. So we wanted to talk a little bit about them and how they tended to deal with us who came here. So a lot of this is how they acted and the advice they gave to people. In general, as most of you know, Elizabeth and Marina founded the center, and Marina passed away in 57. And Elizabeth was in charge of how the center ran. And actually, she didn't really, she and Kitty didn't talk about the business of the center. Kitty didn't mess in that part of it. Elizabeth ran it. She was financially responsible for it. It appears like she was a wealthy woman, and certainly in many ways she was. She wasn't like super wealthy, but she had money.
She was born into it.
She was born into it. Her father was very wealthy and stockbroker in Chicago and New York. And when he sold the company in the 50s or 40s, he sold it to a smaller company, just a new company called E.F. Hutton, that turned into something else. They what was it talking about? Yeah, she had money, but it all went to Baba. She always bought used cars. She told me once, all my life with Baba, I have to juggle my bills. I can't pay them all at once. And there were so many bills from the center. And she had to sort of save to make sure that she went away for a month every year because Baba wanted her to. And knowing her, you would think that once we went up into the attic and because we used to run errands for her upstairs, and we went up and Wendy discovered all of this amazing silver, like trays and things in China and all this stuff that she had gotten for her wedding. It was 1925 or something. And what did you say to her?
I said, Annie Boo, why don't we use this? The tray was this big. And she said, we don't live that life anymore.
Kitty saw people. She was here. She saw people in the late 60s, mostly 70s and 80s when she was here all day long. It was quite an amazing thing to see her do that with such cheerfulness. And we'll talk about her attributes a little bit more, and such openness and innocence that was just like a magnet. And she was very gregarious, and she was an extrovert, but she was an extrovert with a sort of late Victorian coloration, proper in some ways, a very proper King's English, and none of them were emotional people in the sense that they weren't emotional. They weren't big huggers. They would, but they were focused on Baba, really. At any rate, and then Margaret would see people when she was here, and she would only come on holidays because up until she was 90, and up until 94, when she was 92, she taught ballet in New York from 46 to 92. And so she would come on holidays, and when she came, it was a lovely event because she would tell stories, and they were always humorous, and they were always her in such a unique way. Luckily, to save the night, we're showing video clips of all three of these, so you'll be able to see them.
They're wonderful.
As they are.
Wonderful clips.
Nothing can really explain them more like that. And there was a fourth person here too, Jane Haynes, who played a really big role for a lot of us who came in the 70s and 80s. She was a remarkable person, Wendy's mama. And talks have been given here about her as well. But tonight we're talking about these three women who were mandali. They lived with Baba in India in the 30s, in the 40s, and into the 50s. Kitty. Yeah. You can't hear?
Can you hear me?
No.
No, we can't.
Okay. So over to you, Wendy.
Okay. Good. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
It's all right?
Yes.
Oh, good. Pretty close. I mean, nice. Oh, really close. All right. I'm going to give you just a little brief history of Elizabeth again, for those of you who may be new or some of you who may not remember. So, as Buzz said, she was born in 1896 in Chicago on the 26th of July. The family moved to New York City when she was 5 years old. She attended the Charlton School in New York. Then she went to Miss Porter's School in Farmington, Connecticut, 1912 to 1914. Then she had her debut. She was a debutante. Is that how you say it? Mm-hmm. In 1915. She was also a junior league member. Very important, she found. And what was wonderful, one of the things that Annie Boo did, I just want to interject. I say Annie Boo, you will hear me say that a lot. I've been trying to practice saying Elizabeth, but it's really hard because all my diary entries say Annie Boo. So if it comes out, you'll know I'm talking about her. She couldn't say Elizabeth when she was young, so she called herself Boo. That's how it came about. So when we met her, she said we could call her Auntie Boo. All right. So World War One, she went to the docks. She was a Red Cross ambulance driver, and went to the docks to pick up the French soldiers and the wounded. He also became an insurance broker, one of the first on Wall Street.
Female.
First female. Thank you, Buzz. In 1927, she married Kenneth Patterson. And Kenneth met Meher Baba, but did not come to love him. He was a very fervent Christian Scientist. And one of the most sweet things that I heard was when he died, there was an envelope on his little bureau next to his bed, and it said, "For Elizabeth." And when she opened it up, she found this beautiful prayer, and I think it's Christian Science prayer, I'm not sure, and it says, "Oh no, I got it wrong. She didn't say for Elizabeth, he said to Baba." Quite different, sorry. The envelope said to Baba. She opened it up, and the title of it was "Teach Me to Love."
Teach me to love.
Yeah. Teach me to love. So Kenneth died in 57, and Elizabeth became vice president of Myrtle Beach Farms, which eventually became Buz and Chapin, which you know about. Now a little bit of history with Meher Baba. She met him in New York in 1931. Baba brought those early ones, as most of you know, to India in 1933 because he wanted them to meet the Eastern mandali women. Then Baba took them to Nasik in 1937. She drove the Blue Bus in 1938 to 1941, and then founded Meher Center in 1943 with Norina. The clip we're going to show you of Elizabeth has her talking about that, about the founding of the center. So I wanted to give you, so I'm going to be sharing snippets from my diary. And the diary primarily is from when I lived with them in Del River for a year, 1974-75. And so I would try to remember at the end of the day and go write things down. And I wanted to tell you that, again, most of you may know, I met Elizabeth, Kitty, and Margaret when I was 5 years old. And they were so familiar. It was very natural to think of them as family. And they were very loving, accepting, respectful, treated me like a peer. I was 5. And we spent almost every day with them. So I basically grew up with them. I wanted to say that years later I realized that being with them that year, because I met Baba the following year, this is 57, I realized I had been given a glimpse of who Meher Baba is, through them, because of their extraordinary love. And even as a child, I could feel that one-pointedness on Baba in everything they did. So in 1974, Baba graced me with this incredibly rare, blessed opportunity to live with them at Del River. Now, I had helped them for years, but I had never lived there. And how this came about is another story for another time. But it did happen. And I was 23, a very naive, ignorant, young 23. And but the purpose was for me to help Elizabeth and Kitty. Well, of course, as you can imagine, it didn't turn out that way. They ended up helping me to learn about the spiritual life, how to live in the world in the spiritual life. So it was an extraordinary opportunity to witness how these women, these disciples, serve Baba in everyday practical life, in everything they did. The practical application of all those years of training with Baba. So here are a few snippets. Let's see. Before I share them, some of my favorite memories are being with Elizabeth and Kitty in the living room of Dill River when new people came, and hearing them talk, share things with, well, you'll see. Elizabeth had the most extraordinary way. She was so wise. There's no way to describe her wisdom, but she was wise. And she had a remarkable way of going to the essence, the truth of something, the truth of what she wanted to express. So she was a woman of few words. She was very concise, with what she wanted to say. Yeah. I know what it is. They had gone to India, and when they came back, a number of people had stayed back. Many of them knew to meet them. And so we would gather in the living room, and it was just fascinating to watch how they interacted. So here's an example. This woman came, I'll call her Beth, who really wasn't drawn to Baba so much. This is from my diary, actually. It was amazing as ever to listen to Kitty and Annie Boo and watch how they interacted with this woman, whose English was very difficult to understand and who spoke rapidly and laughed a lot. So Kitty said, "How wonderful that you have a sense of humor about life." To which Annie Boo said, "Yes, humor is a sense of proportion." Yeah. And that reminds me of how Baba tells us, take life lightly and God seriously. That's what it reminded me of. Another, in reference to the perfect life as lived by the avatar, Elizabeth said, "It's always new when lived." That reminds me, a young woman was having an amazing experience, a very deep personal experience of Jesus Christ, and was sharing it with Elizabeth, and she said, "Oh, how wonderful that you're having that experience." But you see, and she said, and because they're one, Baba and Jesus are one. She said, "But you see, I didn't meet Jesus. I met Baba." Another wise little statement. Planning isn't all that important. Just being ready for what comes, she said. Planning isn't all that important. Just being ready for what comes. Annie said Baba had them change jobs often to keep them from becoming too attached to any one thing. We had been talking about people changing jobs, that it wasn't such a bad thing to change jobs. Elizabeth said, Baba wants us to be flexible. We rarely continue doing what we start out to do. So don't be discouraged. We rarely keep the same job for life. But remember that every job we do well is for a purpose. You never know when it will be useful again. And that reminds me of the ambulance she drove in during World War I. She got to India, Baba asked her to drive the blue bus, and it's cranked exactly the way the ambulance acts. Exactly the same. So think of how she said, you never know when Baba's going to use it. Use what you know. This morning, Annie Boo and I went into the center. The car loaded up with new goodies for the cabin. We stopped at the Twin and checked out the dishes. I flashed back to the time when Annie Boo discovered there was no grater or colander. This time, she brought both. and a new casserole dish for the kitchen. While we were there, she had me clean out an ashtray someone had left dirty. We exchanged 2 old ugly glasses for 2 new ones she had brought with her. And we took away a broken coffee pot. On our way back to the car, she noticed that the covers on the pumps were all wet and shiny. So she and I turned them over, shook the water off to dry, so they could dry. Then we drove over to the Green Cottage, using the road not for cars. Now it says path only. From that road that comes up behind the Green Cottage is the loveliest view of the lagoon. Annie Boo stopped for a minute to look and admire. One of her favorite spots. And you know, when I say that, I feel, just think about what they did, this place. How they carved it out of the wilderness. Last week, Annie Boo found out that a guest staying at the center returned to the center the night before at 3 a.m. I could tell it made her sad. And she said, I've always said spirituality begins with thinking of the other fellow more than yourself. I've always said spirituality begins with thinking of the other fellow more than yourself. When recalling the young man from Canada who came with drugs in his pocket 3 days ago, she said, quote, I've always said Baba is for everyone. The center is not. If you don't want to spiritually progress, then why come to the center? You're not supposed to act the same way at the center. It's like if you go to a boarding school. You have to act differently. You have to conform to think of others. You must think that it must be voluntary with Baba. You must want to come. You must want to give up something for him. If you want to do drugs or something, then Baba will let you. But should you want to give them up, he will help you. He gives you something to make you happy, like a piece of candy or something. I mean, it's just typical classic humor, Annie Boo's humor. He'll give you a piece of candy or something. Now, Elizabeth's love for animals is legendary, as those of you knew about her. And animals played a huge role in Baba's history. And he often gave her pets to take care of in the ashram. Baba once said, a person who had met the avatar many, many times and skipped many human incarnations may feel very close to the animal world. And I think you were talking about Elizabeth. So Elizabeth told of the dogs one night, of the dog Tippy and Foundy. She said when Tippy died in her New York apartment, Foundy came into the room and started dancing and playing around the center of the room. Elizabeth believed Foundy saw Tippy's spirit and was playing with her. I want to give you, I heard something.
It's someone's hearing aid going off, I think.
Mine?
No.
Beg your pardon.
I told you we were old, right? Nothing.
All right. So, I want to give you just a couple of examples of Elizabeth's wit, because she was extraordinary, very, very funny, and very witty, a dry kind of wit. And she came out immediately. You didn't have to think about it. She just came right out with something very witty. So one day, the new people were coming over and we were preparing tea. And there were a tin of cookies out on the table, and I took they weren't here yet, I took the lid off and was studying them very carefully because I was picking out the ones I wanted. You know, I wasn't going to take them then, but I was planning. So Elizabeth walks up to me and she says, "Now, Wendy, don't eat all the cookies before you put them in your mouth." Then one day, I was staying in the double guest room, which is now Buz's office. And one day she knocked on the door. I opened the door and she says, "Yes." Now, Andrew never said hello and goodbye. She just switched out right away. She said, "Yes, your mother called." And she says, "She wants you to come over promptly at 11. And you are to," let's see, what else did she say? Yeah. Oh, yeah. "And you're to look," wait a minute, "promptly at 11, and you're to look nice." And I said, "Oh my, what shall I do?" And Annie said, "Well, I guess you can't go." I laughed so hard. And what was so cute and endearing is that she would chuckle at her own little book, you know, her own little saying. She would get a kick out of it. It was so charming to see that, to see her twinkle at her own little things. Another humorous, one last one. One day, you all, many of you know the name Ned Foote. He was with Baba on all three, I think, 50, he didn't come in 52, did he? 56? Doesn't matter, 56, 58. Okay. Well, Ned was a lawyer, very well-known lawyer in D.C., and he helped with the incorporation. Baba had him help with the incorporation of the center and certain legal things. So one day he's visiting on the porch of Dill River. That's where most things happened, on that porch. And Ned leaned forward and he said, "Elizabeth, why is it that Baba chose me to find out about him, to love him, to be with him?" And Elizabeth leaned forward and she said, "Well, you see, Baba loved raw material." And she came right out with it. Didn't miss a beat. If I had to choose one word, one characteristic to describe Elizabeth, I would say poise. One of the qualities Baba stressed most for the spiritual life. She had a stillness about her, a profound centeredness, just complete poise. I rarely saw her get disturbed or upset. You know, Elizabeth's face was completely transparent. It reminded me of Baba. Every single emotion expression would cross her face, and you could see it. So when I did see a look of distress, within seconds, it would pass, and she would focus on the problem. But she would have that reaction and then let it go. Oh yeah. So Kitty would get a little, what would you call it? Nervous? Not nervous, but she would be very energetic. And because if a crisis happened, she'd come running to Elizabeth and say, "Oh, Elizabeth, so-and-so is happening. Oh dear, oh so-and-so what happened?" And Elizabeth would say, "Now, Kitty dear, let's just take it one at a time. Tell me, what's the first one?" And then she would listen, consider the problem, and deal with it in a practical way. It was so natural for them, without thinking, to examine everything in light of Baba. That was their training with Baba. And they were amazing examples of living in the present. Someone asked Elizabeth how she was able to give so much to each person, to each and everything, every day. And she replied, "If one sets a time each morning to listen to God, that day becomes the answer."
Mrs. Patterson, when was the first time you were aware that Meher Baba was interested in such a location in the United States?
I think I'll have to preface that my answer to say that I met Mayor Barber in 1931 in New York on his first visit to America. And at the time he spoke about the center was 10 years later, when we were in 1940, we were in India, and he called Narina Machiavelli and myself and said it was necessary that we return to the United States and look for a center for him. And he described it. He said he didn't care where it was, anywhere in the United States, providing it had certain qualifications. And the first one was that it had to be in equable climate. And he described it as not too hot in summer for northerners or too cold in winter for southerners. So right away we knew that it couldn't be the New England states or couldn't be Florida. And then he said that it had to have ample water. He stressed that. And then the next third one was it had to be on virgin land. Not undiscovered land, but land where no one had ever lived. And that sounds so simple to me at that time, because I thought America, out west in different places, there were all sorts of places that where nobody had lived. And then he said it had to be ample property with good soil, and it had to be given from the heart. Well, that, in one sense, made it easy, because we knew that if we found the right property, it would be given from the heart, because only Baba could touch someone's heart. So we never went looking for something that was, how much is it from a price point of view. And in 58, Mayor Barber said he was not coming back to the center. I was immediately thought, well, that doesn't mean I can't go to India. We always think about not seeing him or seeing him. And so I said, if it is so that you're not coming back, then who can come to the center? Because it had been so well known beforehand. And Baba, with his very beautiful smile, and he was then writing on the board, said, all those who love and follow me, and those who know of me and want to know more. At that time, I didn't realize how important it was to those who know of me and want to know more, because as years went on, there wasn't a chance to actually meet Baba, you see. And so now that's the one thing that anyone that comes here, they must know that the center has been entirely for Mayor Baba. Of course, when you say a thing entirely for Mayor Baba, it really doesn't limit it, because Mayor Baba is everything. But they can't come thinking it's a state park or a camp or just a nice place to stay overnight. The first building was built for Mayor Baba. It was called the Cabin on the Hill. And it was Mayor Baba at that time, or at all times, always had one disciple that was right close to him, that was in clapping distance in the next room. And so we had every building that was built after that, we thought of as being Baba standing on the porch and within clapping distance of the other, that cabin on the hill. Yes. Yeah, they could hear. Yes. And so the first one was the near cabin, which is the nearest to the cabin on the hill. And then the far cabin, which is a little further over. So we call that the far. And then the caretaker's cabin. And then the lake cabin. And that was on the lake. But everything at the center has been given with love. The property, I'm sure Father gave it to me with love. And I certainly gave it to Baba with love. I can put it this way. The center was a beautiful place of nature before Baba came. But after he came, it has a plus quality that's indescribable. It is spiritual, but it's something that even if you know nothing, you feel something is very beautiful in regard to the center. And he did come these 3 times. And people came when he was here.
So there is his, as people have said, his presence very much on the center, Baba's presence.
And Baba once said, I never leave. And we feel that he is always here and directs, not in any supernatural way, but in a perfectly natural way. Things happen or they don't happen. And we know it's what Baba wants or doesn't want.
In the 3 times that Baba was here, of course, he gave his sahavas, company, to his lovers. What strikes you as perhaps the differences or the special qualities of each of those 3 times?
Well, some way or other, there isn't a great difference. Because when you're with Baba, his atmosphere is so loving and so, I don't ever use the word powerful, but it's embracing. So embracing that you don't see a great difference. There's just different activities. I think that those who only came once and didn't come another time, they see their time, you see. But it's even in India when people come to see Baba, there's that intimate quality. Whenever you go there still is. And you can't say, what is the difference in intimacy? It's something that you know, something you feel, something that you love, and you can't make that much difference.
I wanted to share with you something we learned actually recently. Is it Baba, Elizabeth went out of the room, I think it was here in 56. And she went out of the room and Baba turned to Mani and said, Elizabeth is God's gift to Baba.
He also said in a letter in the 50s to Elizabeth and Kitty that at the end of this life, she would come to him. She would merge with him. And it was in the same letter he said, I am as much at Meher Center as I am at Mehrabad and Merazad. So, Kitty Davy, who lived at the center from 1952 until her death in 1991, was born in England in 1891. She said she referred to that time as a late Victorian period. And if you ever see photographs of people, how they dressed back then, it was astonishing, really. She lived to 100. She lived her early life until 1931, so she would have been 40 when she met Meher Baba. She lived in London and lived at home with her parents and was a piano teacher. She said at one time she had as many as 80 students that she would teach.
Taught at St. Paul's.
Taught at St. Paul's Cathedral. Oh no,
The school.
School.
Yeah.
Right. There was a great autobiography that she wrote called Love Alone Prevails that she wrote in the 70s and 80s. And it was put together. It's just an amazing testament to her life with Meher Baba. And it was put together with Roz Taubman and Lois Breger. They spent years and years working with Kitty to make that happen. Meher Baba came to her home in 1931, the first place he visited in the West when he came, the very famous, on Russell Road, very famous first visit. Kitty was with the Western women when they traveled to India. The first time they traveled to India in 1933 to live forever and returned home in 6 weeks. She went again in 1937 when Baba called Westerners to Nasik, and she stayed until 1952, when Baba had his first visit here. And Baba, Elizabeth said to Baba, at that time, Narina was very ill, and she passed away 5 years later. And Elizabeth said to Baba, I need help. And Elizabeth didn't know the story until later. And I guess it was or Kitty didn't know the story until later in the 70s. And she found out from Elizabeth, Elizabeth just happened to say it, that Baba said, well, who would you like, Kitty or Rano? And she said, oh, Kitty. So when Baba saw Kitty, he said, this is the famous Kitty story, that he would like her to stay and help Elizabeth. And Kitty said, well, asked her if she would. And Kitty said, yes, Baba, right away. She did tell us later that she didn't think she was going to stay here all that long. And, when Baba came back in 56, she was packed to go back with him. He didn't say a word to her. 58, the same thing. And she said to us once, I felt kind of depressed about it. And in 62, when she went, there was an incident that happened when Rano came out and said something to a group of women that were standing there. And it was, Kitty and Elizabeth and probably Margaret was there and others, about how Baba wanted them all to leave, all the visitors to leave. And it really struck her that she felt like she was on the outside and felt pretty depressed about it when she got back to America. When I heard about being left in 52, I thought, how could she not feel that way? And she did. She got over it. And a lot of her talks in the final years were about that, how she got over it. So from 1952 until her death in 1991, she was at the center. And when a lot of us came in the late 60s, 70s, and 80s, she was the one that most of us spoke to. Elizabeth didn't see people very much. You had to really go out of your way. You had to ask. But Kitty had regular office hours. And how many people actually went to Kitty's office in those years?
Wow.
Yeah.
Look at
We should just stop the meeting and share Kitty stories because they would be amazing. Just amazing stories. So Kitty was the one we saw. And Margaret when she was here, but not like Kitty. Kitty was like the resident counselor almost. And she would tell, it got so that she would actually tell people what to do because they didn't know what to do with their lives. And that really irritated Margaret. She thought, Kitty shouldn't be doing that. Kitty should listen to them and say, well, what do you think Baba wants? And let them find out for themselves. But Kitty didn't do that. She did something else. So, over to you, Wendy.
Really?
Yeah.
I was so engrossed, my dear. Yeah. Oh, you gave the history. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right, so I'm going back to the year that I was at Delaware. When I first, this is from the diary, when I first moved into Delaware, 2 days later, Annie Boo and my mother, Jane, went on their annual trip, and Annie Boo would say, we must retreat from the retreat. That's how she was, with a twinkle and a chuckle. So it was Kitty who broke me in, so to speak. Right away, she began showing me all the tasks that I was to carry out every day. Kitty is teaching me to do everything well, to be aware that every little thing is as important as the big thing. She gave me a list of things I would be responsible for every day. Kitty was famous for her point list and her point letters. The women mandali loved them so much, and they would await them eagerly. There's one time they received a letter of 12 points, I think, but they were wonderful, very efficient. So here's my list. One of them, to make sure the tap is turned off, the dish is put out, all the doors must be shut at night and locked, all the lights should be off when not in use, the utility room must be kept clean, keep the thermostat at 68 degrees, and so on and so on. One day she was cooking rice and told me of how Baba used to pop into the kitchen in the ashram to check on everything, and how he would examine the rice which she was cooking and say, "This rice is perfect," reminding her to do everything that well, that all endeavors deserve equal effort, to do one's best in everything. Baba said, Kitty, if you do everything for me as well as you have cooked this rice, you will please me. So as Buz mentioned, and you all know who knew Kitty, Kitty saw people every day in her book room. Many were new people who wanted to meet her and share about their lives and ask questions, and of course old timers as well. One man came in the other day and was telling Kitty how he couldn't see having a personal God or turning to a personified God. Kitty replied, "But how do you speak of an absolute God? Where do you turn? One has to have an object of consciousness to begin with." Baba never stressed loving his form, but he manifested so that you could focus on his divinity, and so that you could experience a personal God to share with others as well, so that one could begin to talk of God from an experiential rather than abstract. I asked Kitty once if Baba ever made her cry. She said the only time she wept was when she first met Baba. It was very beautiful to her. Every day, every moment, the intention and the care was for Baba. The whole point was to please him. What would please Baba? That's what I witnessed day in and day out. They didn't have to stop and think about it because they had been with him. They had all those years of training. I remember asking Kitty, what about people who are coming now who didn't meet Baba? How are they supposed to learn to live the way that you, Mandali, have learned? And she said, the training is the same. He does show us how. You just have to be vigilant to his voice. One night we were on the porch, the back porch of Interwoven, and Margaret was needling Kitty, which she would do, teasing her about something. Actually, since you mentioned it, it was about her birthday party. You know, hundreds of people would come to Kitty's birthday on the 28th of August. And Kitty really did it for those people, for us, not for herself. She loved to see the community together, and she loved to see harmony. It wasn't about her at all, but Margaret would needle her and say, all those people, why should they all come for your birthday?
I think it was that she was saying it was her 91st year or something, 91st year, and both Elizabeth and Margaret were saying, no, you're 90. No, she said, no, it's my 91st, but Kitty, you're 90. And it went back and forth like that. It was a glimpse into how they were in the ashram, you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
For some reason, because of this, my seeing that Margaret was needling Kitty, and suddenly the atmosphere became quite serious. I want to interject that the incredible thing about Elizabeth, Kitty, Margaret, and of course all the Mandali was their lightheartedness. Always lighthearted. Even when they were serious, it wasn't heavy. you know. But this particular evening, the atmosphere changed. And Baba's presence was very strong, and Kitty was looking quite subdued and thinking, obviously thinking. For some reason unknown to me, I just spontaneously burst out with the question, Kitty, does it ever get any easier? She thought for a long moment and then said slowly, no, can't say that it does. But then she added, the suffering just passes more quickly. I thought about that years later, and I realized the reason it passed more quickly for them is because they didn't hold on to things the way I did. I often did. They let go of it within minutes, sometimes seconds. I witnessed that time and time again. One day, Kitty was talking earnestly with a new person in the dining room. She loved to sit by the window in the sun. I was in the hallway passing through from the back of the house to the kitchen when I heard the man who was there, the newcomer, ask her, Miss Davy, do you feel Maya Baba's love every day? All the time? Kitty answered, no, can't say that I do. But you see, I have this conviction about who Maya Baba is, and I carry it with me. And it makes me want to please Baba all the time. If I had to choose one word to describe Kitty, it would be enthusiasm. The literal meaning is to be alive with God or to be infused with the divine spirit. That was Kitty Davy. Over to you.
Thank you. We're running out of time.
We are?
Yeah.
Uh-oh. We are.
Yeah.
So we have to skip a few things.
We're going to have to skip some things. Do you mind staying a little later?
No. You do? Oh,
No, they don't.
someone said no.
No, they don't mind.
I know. Oh, right.
Okay, then we'll sit back and relax. And okay, so these were in these years in the 80s when Jane would go away, I would sometimes come to the center and stay with Kitty. It was my great privilege to do that. So one day she was expecting a young man to come and see her who was kind of new to Baba, but she had known him for a while. She said, "No, I want you to sit nearby because he's a little unstable, and I'm not sure what's going to happen." But
A little unstable?
yeah,
That was good.
yeah. And she did this from time to time. Sometimes when she was in the book room, she would say, "Sit on the stairs out there, and if a certain kind of subject comes in, then interrupt us and say I'm needed somewhere else." There were some things she didn't really like to talk about, so very few. So this man came, and they were actually sitting on the back porch at this point, and I was in the dining room. He had no idea I was there, and he began weeping at one point. So I really began to pay attention. And he said that all his life he had tremendous guilt. Both parents had committed suicide. All this guilt was built up inside of him and was destroying him. And his dreams and fantasies were filled with this kind of negativity in his life. And he was now breaking up with his wife and things were coming to a head. And Kitty said this, that you must get rid of that guilt. Speak it out. Give it all to God. All that you feel is only weakness and ignorance, not guilt. God does not punish. It is only our ignorance that makes us feel that way. You must be honest and don't stay in the past. The truth will make you free. Baba has come to do away with past notions of sin and guilt. And then he said, why am I this way? And Kitty said, I don't know. None of us know about karma, really. It's too intricate. We don't really know. And he said he'd been using drugs. And she said, all right. She said, you've got to wean your way out of it. She didn't say stop. She got to gradually get out of it because it's not going to help you. This was one of her favorite sayings. She said to him, give all over to him from this moment on. Pull yourself together and move on. As St. Paul said, this is one of her favorite sayings, I live yet not, but Christ liveth within me. Then she said, you must keep your higher self active and try to resist your lower self. And then he went on even further, said that I had really come so that you would do something to help symbolically kill me. Not really kill me, but symbolically. And she said, without skipping a beat, what we all must do is to kill our lower self, says Baba. It is the illusory self that must go. And then she said, you have suffered enough. Baba doesn't want you to suffer anymore. Let's see, I'm going to start abbreviating some of these things too. Oh, this, I'd like to this one. She talked about the center one day. She did two different things about the center. This is one that was, she said it in 1982, and the second one was when she said it in 1989. And by this time, Elizabeth had died. She had gone. Kitty remarked how we must always stay flexible with Baba. Things will not always be the same at the center. She remembered Elizabeth remarking that things would have to change in the future. So, said Kitty, it is no good saying Elizabeth did things this way, because things change. I really like that one. And in 1989, she said, the main thing is we keep the center as it is. We keep it as Baba wants it. And Margaret was sitting there and she said, I'll tell you one thing. Whatever decision is made, it will be up to Baba. I took that to mean the center has to remain the same in that it has to be focused on Baba and the spirit has to be for Baba. The vehicle we use to express who Baba is can change, and we can have cabins and programs and things like that, but it has to remain solely focused on Baba. One of the things Kitty said and Margaret said, which struck me when I had first come to Baba, is that Baba has to bring things up and out. And then he's able to get rid of them. We have to experience them. And I always wondered, what are they talking about? And it's this thing that Baba talks about in the discourses about sanskaras coming up and all that. But for them, in their daily life with Baba, they experienced it as, Baba has to get it up and out. We have to face these things. All these things that were in us, he's going to bring to the surface. And then we have to let go of them. And at one time they were talking, Elizabeth and, or rather Kitty and Margaret, and Kitty said, all these arguments we had, all the women up in the hill in the 30s, said all of it was so petty. It all seemed so petty. And Margaret said, no, Kitty, it wasn't petty at all. It was all very important. And Kitty said, no, I think it was all very petty. And then Margaret said, well, it may have been petty, but it was all necessary. It had to come up and out. And Kitty said, well, that's right. So I think maybe we'll move. I want to say, let's see Kitty, and then I'll say one thing after that.
You ask if I was a disciple or a follower of Baba's? I was neither a follower nor a disciple when I first came to Baba, because I really didn't know anything about him. It was only after meeting him that made me feel I have never met anybody like him before, and I was drawn almost like a magnet to whatever he stood for. The only things I ever heard at the beginning was that he said he had come not to teach, I have come to awaken, not to teach, to awaken the consciousness of the Christ spirit within. And that appealed to me very much, because I remember from a child on, even to the day today, those words from the New Testament, I live, yet not I, but the Christ liveth in me, of St. Paul's, I've lived with since I was 14, and I never ever expected to be able to experience that, as I did experience it after having been many, many years with Meher Baba in India and elsewhere. Suddenly dawned on me what it really meant to say the Christ lives within. And that appealed to me very much from Baba. And then when Baba stressed so much that practical life and the spiritual life should be harmoniously and live together, it wasn't spiritual to avoid the practical and disappear away into monasteries or convents where you weren't in touch with the world of illusion and duality, but to find God in the illusion and the duality was what Baba wanted. Says the aim of life is to love God, and the goal of life is to become one with God. And although my hobbies had been, I was a music teacher before I came to Baba for 15 years, and my interest had been mysticism, the Christian mystics, and I never thought I was ever going to realize that there had been such a thing as mysticism in the world long before the Christian era. And then when I came in touch with Eastern mysticism, I realized how much we had in common. And Baba had always said, the East has to come to the West and the West has to come to the East. They both have something to contribute to life. And therefore gradually I began to feel, well, what is it about Baba that draws me to him? And I could only answer it by a certain feeling that I had never experienced such love before. It's a sort of divine love. It's like a magnet that drew you to him. And it must have been that because he stayed with my parents for the first night, and the next morning he left to go down to the retreat in the south of England. And as he got into the car, and the car was going, this is in 1931, September the 12th, and he turned to me, and he was then not speaking, but he had his alphabet board, and he said, is there anything you want? And I hadn't any time to think, but I could hear the car waiting and anxiously to get off. They a long drive of 7 hours to the country. And I said, yes, I said, greater opportunities for service and a greater capacity to love. And then out of the blue came, oh yes, and perhaps spontaneous goodness. And Baba just spelled out on his board, you'll have soon all those things that you have asked for. And that it was left like that. And then within 3 days, I was finding that that was exactly what I was going to do, that my love for Baba was going to take the form of active service, love and service, selfless service. And from that day to the present, that is 52 years, that is what I've been doing. That the love I felt when I first met Baba translated itself immediately into selfless love and selfless service, which I feel is the goal of life.
Yes,
And that is, so now you can call me a disciple if you want, but it's an active disciple, and it's the outcome of love. There's no such thing as static love. Love has to be active. In fact, Baba very much stresses voluntary work, but he also says don't lean on each other. Therefore, it's practical to have a career, to work, but if it's your opportunity to do voluntary work and serve mankind, that's even better.
Yes, ma'am.
But he said the spiritual life consists in turning selfishness into selflessness, and lust into purity, and greed into generosity. So that is, as you might say, the things that appealed to me.
Yes, ma'am.
Because I was brought up in late Victorian times, and Protestantism wasn't very broad in those days. And think of the East as not being heathen, but of being one with us. And then, of course, I think Baba's great message was that truth is oneness. Pilate never answered that. When he asked that question, Jesus never answered it. But Baba had always said, separateness is ignorance, And oneness is the truth. The truth is that we are one, whatever our color, whatever our creed, and that there are many paths to God, and that you have to search for yourself, find the path which brings you closest to God. Remembering always that the aim of life is to love God, and the goal of life is to become one with God. And Baba also stressed, which interested me, that faith and love, rather like the Catholic Church in a way, that faith and love are gifts of grace. So then we said to Baba, well, if faith and love are gifts of grace, what can we do then to serve you? So Baba said, to try to please God. And you know, it's in pleasing God that you learn how to love Him more. And I think that appealed to me too. And that's the way I think my last years of life, shall I say, that I think that is one. Let every thought, word and deed be what you feel will be pleasing to God. So that is what drew me to Baba.
Well, let's talk about the center then, and how the center relates to your feeling of service.
Yes.
To what the center means to be at, to try to attain oneness.
Yes, absolutely. The center, Baba had said when I was in India, he said, one day I want to have a center in the West, because the East has to come to the West, and I want it to be suitable for Easterners as well as Westerners. And therefore he sent Elizabeth Patterson, who was with me in India at the time, back to this country to find a place, and he laid down the 5 principles, which you know. And she looked, as you know, for 4 years, and she found Myrtle Beach as suitable for what Baba wanted. And Baba came over here to open it in 1952. Now, I had been 18 years in India with Baba, watching him work with the lepers and the poor and living the way of life, because he said, if we had lived the way that Christ had taught, there's no need for another manifestation of God. But it is because Christians have not lived the life that Christ taught, or the Buddhists the life that Buddha taught, or Zoroastrians the life that Zoroastrian taught, that it was necessary from time to time that God manifests himself as a prophet or as a great soul, that we might know what love for God really means. So you see, Baba wanted to have a place where we could all come together and share. Because Baba's greatest lesson, I think, is that we must share with each other. Therefore, he wanted a center where Easterners and Westerners from all over the world could come and live the way of life which he wanted, which was sharing with one another, the feeling of oneness amongst each other. You can talk about God in the center as easily as you can talk of your profession or your card or your family life. It's a topic which all people are interested in. That is the goal of life, to find God as your real self. Therefore, to do that, you must share. You cannot get very far if you are all closed in. You know how difficult it is to communicate, and when you're with Baba, it's so easy to communicate. He comes down to your level and brings you up to his. He never preaches at you. Therefore, the center has served a real purpose of bringing people together. When I was here when it opened, I was here when the center opened, and that was in 1952, and people from all over, there were 300 or 400 here, black and white, and Baba was there just to meet them. And what they all felt was this consciousness of love. And Baba said, I will never leave the center. My consciousness will always remain here. And that's what people come for that renewal of the spiritual life. They'll come just for 1 night or 2 nights, and they'll go back to New York, they'll go back to wherever they've come, and they feel renewed in spirit. And today you must for yourself feel that need to get away from the hustle of life and be able to communicate with God in the peace and the quietness. And that's what we are begging and longing, that this place will be kept for that very purpose.
It certainly will.
So Margaret was born in Norfolk, England in 1892. Her father was the owner of a small coastal fleet. She started studying dance at an early age and was always very athletic. At 18, she took up ballet and progressed quickly. She danced with the Ballet Russe. She studied with the famous Enrico Cicchetti in the private London studio he ran from 1918 to 1923. where he served as a teacher for the Diaghilev Ballet Company. When Chapin retired to Italy in 1923, she took over teaching at his studio in West Street, London. Her connection with Baba, she heard about Baba in 1931 at Meredith Starr's retreat at East Challicombe, Devonshire, England, and it was run by Meredith. And Margaret met Baba on that first visit when he was staying at Kitty's home. It was she who first opened the door for him. At that moment, she saw him as, in her own words, a vision of gentleness, grace, and love that touched the heart immeasurably. At the end of that momentous day, she says, I only knew that from that moment, whatever rough treatment he may have afterwards handed out, there has never been a moment's doubt as to his being the embodiment of love and life. She was among the first group of Westerners to go to India in 1933. Then, of course, as Buzz said, sent home 6 weeks later. Went again in 37, 39, stayed in India until 1946, when she returned to London. And you've mentioned this, she was here on holidays. She came as often as she could, and she was here a lot. And people would come and visit with her. She'd give talks in the library. But Margaret, those of you who knew her know that she was incredibly quick-witted, very, very witty, and very funny. Yeah. Oh, and also I think you've said she's very self-deprecating. She never put herself forward. They wouldn't allow it, just as the monks wouldn't allow it. You couldn't put them on a pedestal. Just bow down to him. She talked about the kerfuffles in the ashram, how human Baba was, how available he was, how we don't need leaders to find him. She talked about her spiritual pride and about being natural. And here's a story about that, about spiritual pride that she loved to tell. Margaret was feeling very proud in India that she was living there and putting up with all these difficult things. She got boils in her body. She got bitten by a rabid dog. I mean, she kept getting awful things. But she felt she started to feel this feeling of pride in herself. What a good disciple I am, that I put up with this, that I'm living here. So one day, Baba said to me and said lovingly, you are a jewel of a disciple. Staying here when you don't really want to. She says, I, however, was not yet ready to see what he was trying to show me, and smilingly accepted the comment. That's how she. A few months later, he again said for me, and again said, you are a jewel of a disciple. Staying here when you don't really want to. Immediately, Margaret says, I remembered that once before he had used exactly the same word to me, but this time I was ready for it and was overwhelmed when I saw the ridiculous pride that had been growing in me. I burst into tears and said, oh, now, Baba, now I understand what you mean. He sat there smiling, loving, and finally, after my outburst and recovery from the same, we laughed together. But I can assure you that that particular piece of pride did not return. Others did, of course.
Margaret was such a unique personality. They all were. She was a theater person. She was an artist, and so she had the combination of being creative, funny, filled with stories. She was in vaudeville in England, and it was called what was it called back there? Back then, it was called. Oh God!
What are you thinking?
What was vaudeville called in England in the teens? No, it was called.
It's called vaudeville.
No, not in England. So anyway, she was that kind of person. She had jokes and witticisms and funny songs that she would just spontaneously start singing. And And Baba loved her sense of humor, and she used to get away with murder around Baba because she made him laugh so much. And she was also, as being a professional theater person, she also had tremendous discipline and took it very seriously, being a dance teacher. And I know we have one of our students in here, Edward's here. When I first went to India in 1972, I went to Baba House in New York, and Donald Mahler was there, and I didn't know where I was staying overnight, so he said, you can come and stay with me if you want, so I did. And the next day he had a class with Margaret, and he said, why don't you come with me? I had no idea who she was, actually. And then he told me, and I thought, wow, I really would like to meet her. So I went to her class with him, and it was an advanced class. So he had, all these professionals were there, and he went up and asked her, would it be okay if I could sit in the class, and then I was on my way to India. And she just kind of looked at me, no expression on her face. And she looked at him and said, oh, okay. So, and I had never seen anything like that in my life. How she taught them, how disciplined she was, how critical she could be, how she wasn't shy about saying things like, you dancers are not trying, you think you know everything. And she made them get on the bar and do all these things. I have no idea what they did. I'm not a dancer. I don't have the vocabulary. I know about dance because of her. She would talk about the history of it and all that. But it was an amazing thing to see. So she had that disciplined side of her that the world of dance recognized this person as one of the gems in their lives. And she was hysterically funny. So one day, I mentioned earlier, she never liked Kitty giving people advice. She felt like that wasn't their job. Their job was, when people came to them, that they should just listen, and that they should coach people in, well, what do you think Baba would want you to do? One of the first times I met her was later in 72, and she really didn't remember I'd gone to the class. And I was talking to her about my life, and I was thinking, I'm not really quite sure what I'm doing with my life, which she was used to hearing that from this crowd. And she said, well, whatever you do, you should try to be successful at it. You should try to be successful at it. So, I thought, oh, that sounds like ego to me. And I didn't say it, but she could tell that I was thinking, what? Because I was in this spiritual aspirant. She said, yeah, you can't surrender to Baba unless you have something to surrender. You have to have an ego to let go of it. So it's good to have a...
Yes. That was what I wanted to add about.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Just wanted to quickly, one day, we were talking about jobs, and Margaret said, well, you have to have confidence in yourself, in your ego, in order to have confidence, to give it up and have confidence in Baba. That's what I said.
Yeah. So one day, it was when was it? It was 84. In Dilruba, where she was staying in the summer. She stayed. And she was sitting there talking to her, and she said, one day, she said, when I was there, I was a correspondent. When I lived in India, I was a correspondent. And she said, and Baba used to give us letters, give me a letter. At first he would help me write it, but then he would just say, just write it. Just write that with it. Erich had that same problem with Baba. I'm sure they all did. Baba would give them a letter somebody wrote, and he'd say, go ahead and answer it. They would have no idea what to say. Didn't know the person, didn't know, how am I supposed to answer? So she said, once Baba told me to write a letter to someone, a response to a letter this person had written to Baba. This man's letter was full of just how wonderful he was and all the incredible things he'd done. It was equally full of all his faults and all the terrible things he did. Well, I really didn't know what to say to this man, so I wrote him back and said to go on doing these things as much as he wants and then die. Then take a new body and come back with a fresh new life. I went and showed the letter to Baba, and he laughed and laughed. And then he told me to write another letter. And she said, well, I didn't see how the man was savable. Do you want to... Let's move on. I know. So, gosh. I wanted to tell this final leading into the story and then move.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that that always touched me about Margaret was that she actually left India in 1946. She had received a letter from, I think it was...
Father Welsh?
It was either, let's see... it was either Anthony Tudor or Lucia. Do you remember who she received the letter from, Edward?
No, I don't remember that, but I do know that Tudor was on tour in London with the American Ballet Theatre, and he was the one that said to Lucia Chase, oh, we need to bring her back as ballet mistress to the United States, and that's how she got to the States.
So I guess it was Lucia Chase that wrote the letter. Out of the blue, it came to Margaret. She said, I had no idea. She said, at this point in my life, I was pretty miserable in India. She said, never really liked India. I didn't like the food. There were so many diseases, you never knew what you were going to catch. And my body was full of boils and I was sick all the time. And I didn't see Baba. He wasn't around. He would leave and then he'd come back. At this time, she was actually living at Marazad, and she said that was the best year of being with Baba, was when she lived at Marazad with the Eastern women. But she said, she was the only Westerner there, but she said, but when Baba would come and see the girls, all of us, he would tell me to leave and sit somewhere else. Imagine that. So she didn't explain. She said, well, imagine how that felt, but that's what he did. So she was miserable in India. She was happy with Baba, but miserable in India. So she gets this letter and she thinks, oh, maybe I should do this. Maybe I should leave. So she told this story in two different ways. Once she told me she gave it to Baba and Baba looked at it and didn't say anything and gave it back to her and walked away. And she felt that she should leave, that Baba was saying she should leave. Another way she told it that Baba said, yes, you should go. And the longer part of the story is, and she ended up going, and Baba actually went with her to the train station to see her off and said, you will be my link to the West. And she went to Bombay and stayed with Nargish, and then she went off and got to Britain, and she said she had been away from the dance world for 7 years, and she was so nervous because new things had happened, and she didn't really know what to do. And she did see Anthony Tudor one day, and he said, "Hello, ducks. Seen the light?" And she felt like that was Baba saying, "Don't worry about it." And she felt Baba was taking over. In other words, he was teasing her. So, but the rest of the story was, so she felt like I should go. I should leave. And so she was at Marazad, and by then Kitty and Rana were around then too. So she started to pack. And Kitty and Rana got word that she was leaving and went into her room and started to berate her for leaving. Like, how could you leave, Baba? How fortunate you are. What is the matter with you? Don't you know that you're making a terrible mistake? And she said, they went on and on for so long that I began to cry. Sob. They were still there. Sob. Imagining Margaret sobbing is just an impossibility.
She was in her room.
She was in her room, but they were all there, and then Baba came, because she had heard this. And Baba said, what's going on? And she said, well, I never was a snitch in the ashram. I didn't like it when people snitched on each other to Baba, but I felt like, well, I'm going to tell him what happened. So she did. And Baba just listened and said, you will teach dance for me in America. And she heard it, but she didn't take it in because she was going to London. So she didn't know what he was saying. So one day, it was in 1987. And by then Margaret had lived here. Wendy and I helped to move her down here from New York. She had lived in Happy House, which burned down later.
5 years.
And so Kitty said, let's go see Margaret. So we went over to Happy House, and Margaret was in a wheelchair, and she was sitting in the living room, and a lovely fire. And Kitty said to me, I want to tell you a story. So she tells me that story in front of Kitty.
You mean Margaret?
Margaret tells me that story in front of Kitty about how they made her cry, and Baba came in, and she was in tears and sobbing. And the whole time Kitty is progressively looking down at her lap, you know. And then Margaret turns to Kitty and said, do you remember that, Kitty? And Kitty said, yes, I remember. Now, don't you feel bad? And Kitty said, yes. It was how Margaret would tease Kitty. Kitty was not a teaser, but Margaret was, and it was an uneven playing field. So let's show the film.
We were staying with Baba at a small hotel near Portofino. It was in Santa Margherita, really. And after a bit, the whole hotel got filled up with people who were visiting Baba. And we had a lovely time there with Baba, walking over the hills. And Baba was very, very full of light and life. And we walked over these lovely hills, and Baba was with us all the time. Now, what I'm going to tell you is about Baba and an amusing dancing lesson he had. Most of the other disciples had gone out to have their passports put right or something. I really don't know what was wrong with them, because my passport was all right and Delia was all right. But the others all had to go and have something done. So Delia and I were in the garden of this hotel alone, and suddenly Baba appeared. He looked very beautiful, as usual, but full of mischief and love, lots of love, but there was still a touch of mischief there. And he came up and he said to us, well, what shall we do? And as I've already told you, he had told us that he'd come to meet us on our level, so I had what I thought was a joke, and I said, well, let's leave the universe and have some fun, Baba. Leave the universe for the afternoon. So Baba nodded his head and looked delighted at the idea of leaving the universe. And first of all, he jumped on my back. That was the first piece of leaving the universe, and then he broke my back. But he then said that he would like to have a dancing lesson. So Chanji took his hand and brought him to class. And I asked a few of the usual questions one asks a new pupil. And then I took his hand and I did 1, 2, 3 hop, almost like a polka step in front, going forward. And he joined in immediately. There was no having to learn it. And we danced all around the garden, and it was like flying. Baba was his hair flying and his white robe flying, and we both doing 1, 2, 3 hop all around this garden, right round and it was quite a long way, but I've never felt such lovely dancing in my life. I mean, it really was inspiring to move with Baba like that. And then I think I showed him something else, but it wasn't quite such an excitement and such a beauty as the first step. And that was Baba's dancing lesson. Meredith Starr, in telling us about Baba, told us a lot of things that were wrong, about the things we should not be allowed to do if we followed Baba, and things that were wrong to do. And among other things, he told us that we should not make up. Meher Baba would not like it, and very strict about not making up. So we were in Paris that Christmas, and Baba said he was going home via Marseille, and he said, well, Margaret shall take me to Marseille and see me on the ship. She has such excellent French, which wasn't true at all, but I didn't correct it. My French was awful. It's real good English French. But I accepted it, and I went with Baba alone to Marseille. Chanji was with us, and I think Kaka. I don't know. There were two of the men disciples. And we went down to Paris by train. And I slept in the next compartment to Baba, and all night long Baba knocked on the wall. Every hour on the hour, practically. And it turned out he meant, I love you. So I didn't get much sleep that night, and we arrived at Marseille early in the morning and went down to we took Baba's luggage to the ship he was going to sail on, and then we went back to the quay at Marseille to have breakfast. And we were sitting there, and I must have looked like nothing on earth, not having had much sleep at night, and no makeup on my poor face. And Baba looked at me rather as if he were not too pleased with the sight. And he suddenly tapped his face like this. And I thought, well, I don't know what that means. And I looked at Chanji for help, and Chanji didn't know either. So he did it again. And I thought, a little joy came, and I thought, well, perhaps he means I may put on a little powder, but he can't bear this. So I got out my powder puff and showed it to Baba. He did this again. I thought, well, he can't mean rouge. After all, Meredith said they couldn't possibly. However, I got my rouge out, and I showed it to Baba, and sent me off to make her up in the ladies' room, which was quite a lesson as to what is wrong and what would lead one to God or anything else. It certainly wasn't going without makeup. This is a song we sang for Baba, or at least this is part of the song. We are the girls of Baba's camp you heard so much about, and everybody stares at us whenever we go out. Now this was my verse. For I am just Zuleika. I thought that I could dance. I've lost my school, I've lost my hope, and I think I've lost my chance. Then we sang all together towards Baba. We sang it straight to Baba. We sang, the last line was the punch line of the song. For we are not God realized, but we hope it's so with you. And we also wrote a play, also taking off what Baba had been doing. We each took we became our own selves at about 70 years old. I think this was rather a prophetic play anyway. And Delia was very old, and Minta was very old, and I played Norina's part. They left me out altogether. I played Norina's part. And at that time, Baba had been playing up a game about the perfect boy. I don't know if you ever heard that. But he said that there was a perfect boy that had to be found, and that he was somewhere in Europe, and this boy had to be found. Well, Kitty was sent to Scotland, and she brought back a boy who was rather cross-eyed and an extraordinary-looking creature, and he got sent back. He was to be the handsomest boy in the world. Norina was sent here, and other people were sent to other places. So we based the play on this perfect boy. we were very old, and we were sitting around the table, and I was copying Norina's remarks. Fantastic, I said at intervals and so on. And there was a lot of it, but the point was, finally, the door opened and in came Quentin Todd with a hat on his head with a feather at the back and shorts and a coat, and he walked in, and we were all delighted. I think the boy at last, this must be the boy, said everybody. So we asked him questions. We said, do you speak English? And he said, oh, yes, yes. Do you speak French? Oh, oui, oui. Do you speak German? Ja, ja. And Russian? Da, da. And we all looked at each other with great delight. This is the boy at last. And then Baba will do this, and Baba will speak directly. He knows this boy is found. Well, just at this moment, the door opened again, and in came Kaka, dressed as a mailman, with a letter addressed to Norina. No, it was a telegram addressed to Norina, which she tore open, and it said, owing to an eruption of Vesuvius, I shall not be speaking on April the 1st. And we all fainted, except Delia, who put up her arms and she said, I still believe.
I think all of these three presented them as they really were. That's how Margaret was in her life, spontaneous, and also she had an iron will. I don't know if you could tell that from that, but she did. Anyway, we wanted to present a little bit about them, and we went on too long. We're sorry about that. Do you have any final things? No, thank you, Jay Bob.
Thank you.
Yeah.